I always think it's Cena saying that when she starts.
Yeah, it's a good sympathetic American accent. So, Conrad, FeedaMillion, what does it mean to you?
Well, I started thinking about what were the origins of it. Where did we get the idea? And actually, it was you that came up with the idea because of your interest in what's going on with regard to the space mission and getting people to 1 million people on Mars, maybe towards the end of our lifetime anyway. And I read something over the weekend that there's really determined effort to get a community on the moon by the end of the decade. And I thought, that's, if we get them onto the moon, then moving them onto Mars is something that's quite possible, I would have thought. And that just made me think that feeding the people that go there is becoming urgent. Otherwise, you can't take people there. And you can't have a supermarket delivery van going there every other day. You've got to grow the food there, I would have thought. So the idea you had was how do you grow enough food to feed a lot of people in either on the moon or on Mars? And then we started talking about, well, if we're going to try and do that, maybe the best place to try and do it is right here. So if we can't do it here with all the resources and expertise that's available to hand, then there's very little chance of doing it there. Yeah. And then we began to realize that actually, if we could build one place that could feed up to 1 million people with all the various dietary requirements that are necessary, if we could do it here, say where we are in Sheffield, where we've got this regeneration idea, that maybe that could be planted in other parts of the world, this world, before we go to Mars, and maybe in some what's otherwise hostile environments for agriculture, like in the hottest parts of Africa and the coldest part of the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, where lots of people live, and food has to be transported to them from the warmer parts of the world. And you just think, well, if what we have is a grossly inefficient way of feeding ourselves, and if we could bring our collective knowledge and expertise together in a concentrated way, that would make much more sense. Even if there were slight modifications in each place we go, because I don't know, obviously the people in Africa eat different things to the people in West Yorkshire. So, but many of the plants will be the same, and the cleverness of our technologies allows us to vary the diet immensely, I would have thought, depending on the location where we're at. So, so my thoughts are, I think it's a great idea for this world as well as outer space, if mankind ever gets beyond this earth. But it makes so much sense economically and technologically that I think, but what it does need is cooperation, and it needs some bodies to encourage and bring in the various parties and help them to feel that actually it's a business opportunity and it's not necessarily a threat to them. We're not trying to steal technology, we're just trying to bring in the experts into one location so that we can grow the food that's necessary to feed lots of people. So there's my opening. What did you think about FeedaMillion? What did you think?
Well, I agree with all that, and that the origins are looking forward and looking down at development on Earth. I've always been uncomfortable at some basic part of myself about the consequences of interdependence, particularly across cultures, because it leaves you exposed to events. You know, the other side could say, you know, I'm not going to send you any more corn, so you're going to starve. So independence, I think, is something that food independence is something that I think is important. And in a way, I think it's a scandal in the UK that you're not food secure, that you get something like 40% of your food from the EU. Is a perfectly fertile country with plenty of farmland. Why we import stuff? And usually people import stuff, and they in the process, what you're doing is you're backing up, you know, repressive regimes. I lived in California for a while, and I noticed that one place, I can't remember what the name of it was now, but it was promoted as the garlic capital of the world, and you know, because the growing conditions were ideal for growing it. Over a period of a couple of years, that was decimated by imports of garlic from China, and the reason that it was cheaper, that they couldn't actually compete in California with the price that people were doing it in China. But when you did a little bit of a deep dive about how the Chinese were producing garlic at such a low price, you find that that's what they got the prisoners to do. You know, that people in prisons were, you know, 8-10 hours a day. What they did, they peeled garlic, and they were given pennies, if nothing. So, and the end result is that you know, an industry which had all sorts of positive impact in that part of California. Okay, people get cheaper garlic, but it's the consequence of that. You know, what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is you're encouraging a repressive regime to do not such nice things. So I think my original feeling is, you know, looking to the future, if we're going to spread out to the stars and live on other planets, then importing from Earth is not a practical possibility. You've got to be able to grow stuff. So you've got to be able to grow stuff indoors. That's basically what it is, in an artificial environment, in a controlled environment. And it turns out that there is a reason to do that on Earth as well, that it actually makes some economic sense to be able to do that. And the key thing that it does provide is it provides the potential for food security. But it has many other benefits as well. But one of the principal problems, I think, that the world is facing, where we just turned the clock on 8 billion inhabitants in the world, is the increasing effect that has on the basic ecology of the planet. In particular, the destruction of rainforests and wilderness areas for farming, and often it's monoculture farming, you know, soybeans for you know, cattle production. That's what's happening, and a tremendous deprivation to the long-term benefit of the climate, in terms of species loss, in terms of environmental degradation. And people are, you know, the economic model of get it cheapest where you can get it. The way the system works is that usually goes either to the margins of production, you know, like in Argentina or Bolivia or Brazil or in Kalimantan or Indonesia, where the regulations are a lot less stringent than they are in the West. So I think, you know, if you look at the UK, we probably farm just about as much as you can farm, you know, without going into significant more work in marginal areas. So how do you expand? Well, it's been shown that if you control the environment, you know, for minimal pesticides, minimal water use, minimal labor, then growing in a controlled environment can be 50 to 100 times more productive than the same square footage of farmland. So if you could supply, you know, 20% of the UK's needs in what you call vertical farms or in controlled environment, that's a huge amount of land that gets freed up that you can rewild. You can grow forests in it, and where indigenous animals can thrive that are currently threatened. These are things that I think when you look on the long term, it's actually probably more vital that this FeedaMillion issue happens on Earth than it is even on Mars. It's fundamental. You can't have a million people on Mars without it being self-sufficient in food and energy. But the consequence of that, if you've got a million people in the UK who are self-sufficient on food and energy, then you know, then you're less dependent on getting your grapes from Chile or your garlic from China or you know, something from Pakistan or whatever. And we can see just in the last 6 months the consequence of the problems in Ukraine. I'm not taking sides one way or another about whose fault all this is, but the end result of it is that what used to be the breadbasket of Europe, when everybody thought was, you know, reliable forever, is no longer reliable. You know, it's being devastated, and in the process, the source of cheap energy, you know, from Russia and from Ukraine is also devastated. So this thing of food security, and in fact energy security, I think is just as important as food security. They go together. But food security, I think, is the key thing in a still expanding world population. That this is, you know, we're already, I think, up against the buffers on available farmland, you know, for cutting down trees and planting farm, and it's inefficient. It's inefficient, and you know, we have the technology, we have the know-how. You can produce better food. You know, you can produce better food under controlled environments without pesticides, with the tailored amount of nutrients that are required. And you can do it with less people. You can do it 24/7. If there's a hurricane that comes through, you know, well, you don't get hurricanes in the UK, but bad weather, you know, you get a flood in, you know, East Anglia, which is where you know, it's the breadbasket of England, where most of our food is grown. You know, that's about a meter above sea level. You know, it's very vulnerable to sea level rise, to you know, to natural floods or things like that. I haven't had much of those, but going into the future, that's going to be, you know, it's going to be a serious issue, food security. So this thing of, so I think the case for FeedaMillion has ramped up in the last couple of years in these two things of, you know, the geopolitical issues, particularly in relation to China, but also in relation to Russia. You realize that, you know, it's, well, I noticed today, you know, the Turks are launching missiles across their border into Kurdish lands. You know, this is into other sovereign territories, you know, into Iraq and Syria and Iran. You know, this is beginning to be, you know, a kind of outbreak of border disputes. And then you put into the thing about millions of people, you know, being moved from one country to another through becoming refugees. You know, food security to me is it's got to be the kind of priority.
If we built this place, say we built one in Sheffield, you've already mentioned how even a large area like the Ukraine is vulnerable. You know, you just need a missile or two to come and that's you out of action. Well, could that be the case with FeedaMillion? We have to take that into account. You know, if we've got concentrated food prep or food growing area, would that be the target?
Well, it's a lot more difficult to hit a target if it's, you know, if it's 50 to 100 times more efficient. Most of that is technology, and most of the technology is up here. You know, it's a system that you know about. You know, so you can rebuild that in a way easier than, you know, clearing a minefield full of you know, shells which were on a farm. I think actually, you know, it's a much smaller target. I mean, I think we did that. If you take the whole of Yorkshire, I think I worked this out. The whole of Yorkshire, which I don't know, is one of the biggest counties in the UK. You know, and it's one of the bigger farmland areas. If you said, okay, well, we'll take that into you know, a FeedaMillion type place, you would have 3 or 4 of these type of operations dotted around, one here, one there, one up in the northern part of the country. So you would get security by being a number of them. So I don't think well, if you're getting missiles coming into West Yorkshire, then I think food is not probably your basic problem. Then I think you got bigger problems to deal with, like who's sending missiles.
But okay, so if you accept that it's a good idea, then you've got to build the infrastructure and have a clear message for the existing people who are growing food in a controlled environment. Yeah. How to persuade them to come to this particular place.
Yeah.
You've got all the story that you've got, but mostly these growers are only self-interested, aren't they? If they're growing lettuces, they want to conquer the lettuce world and grow lettuces for everybody in the world.
Yeah.
So we have to have a message for these individuals and say, why don't you come to this FeedaMillion hub or complex or whatever we decide to call it, campus, and grow your lettuces here. We'll supply the infrastructure to make that happen, and we'll address probably the main economic issue associated with growing in a controlled environment, which is energy. Where do we get the energy from? And where do we get the water from? And how do we distribute the food? And all those kind of things, which individually growers have to address. But if we did it on a communal or collective manner, we might come up with some better economic models. Don't you think?
Well, I think there's a few things there.
There are.
As a part of I mean, UK is not in the EU anymore, but as a part of the common agricultural policy, one of the things that the EU was promoting was the if you like the rewilding of spaces, you know, the reconstruction of hedges, of the planting of trees, indigenous trees, and that sort of thing. If you take lettuce as an example, you know, here we have InFarm, which is just got off their factory in Bedford. Their expectation is that from that one space, they could supply the lettuces for the whole of the UK from one location. Well, what does that do? Oh, well, that puts a lot of lettuce farmers out of business, apart from anything else. But you know, with the right approach, there are probably other better things that the lettuce farmer in East Anglia or in West Yorkshire can do with their land rather than grow lettuces. You know, plant trees that would be more useful, do something for climate change, and that is that's, if you like, the third prod about how you know, the value of doing this intensive agriculture in buildings is because it allows, I mean, farming, I think it's 30% of all the greenhouse gases are generated from farming. So, you know, if you can take farms out of commission where they're net producers of greenhouse gases through animals and, you know, churning up the ground and whatever. And if you can reverse that and rewild those areas, these are the sort of things that government intervention can do. I mean, and farmers will do. You say self-interest, yeah. It has to. You have to get the self-interest to be motivated to produce something which is of community value. And this is a net benefit. You know, take the lettuces off the land, put them into an intensive place where they're all organic, there's no pesticides used, and take the land and plant trees on it. You know, indigenous trees. You know, encourage wildlife. Governments can and should do that kind of encouragement. The net benefit for the planet is a net benefit. You know, the potential of global warming is minimized, food security is improved, the technology is developed, and that technology, once it's developed, is available then in Chad and South Africa and you know, elsewhere around the planet. You know, it's just a much more effective way. It's almost like, you know, in the 1910s, the beginning of the motor car industry, you know, they were made by hand, you know, in a workshop. You know, the first motor cars were made in a workshop. You know, labor intensive, yeah, and they were good ideas. But somebody came along, you know, said, well, you know, let's put it in a factory, let's put it on a production line, and then a whole new industry is produced, and probably a net minimization of you know, resources which were when people made them in workshops. So I think you can make a case, I would make a case that you know, that growing in this kind of environment is a net benefit to even the farmers who get put out of business. Well, they're not put out of business. It's just they grow something else. You know, your farm turns into a theme park, or you know, you grow something which is of value to the planet, like trees. Trees are the, you know, there were pre-Spanish Armada. You know, there was tree covers over the UK from, you know, from one end of the country to another, and in that environment, if you could go back to that there was tree cover from north to south all the way over, and food was produced in factories dotted around, that would be a much more pleasant place to live in my view, and certainly from an environmental point of view. trees are the greatest promoters of solution to global warming that you can think of. That's my view.
But what about this? How do we persuade them to come, and how do we create the infrastructure? It means a lot, isn't it?
This is starting off is always tricky, but if there's an economic model to it, then it will happen. Just needs a nudge to get that going, and you're beginning to see that now. You're beginning to see there's an economic model to.
Well, the big investment.
But it's a big investment. You're absolutely
big. I mean, people are starting to talk about investing billions in it.
Yeah, you are.
And,
well, somebody has to make it worthwhile. This is why, the reason why most of this is happening now in places like Saudi Arabia and the Arab Emirates and Singapore and in the United States is the government recognizes the need of this and they help to subsidize it to make it worthwhile, or they have things like abundant energy that they can basically write off to zero. I mean, that's the main problem in doing in establishing this technology is the intensification of energy use.
We're fortunate here, aren't we? In and around Sheffield, we've got the potential to get low-cost energy, and we've certainly got the expertise. Lots of clever people, universities, and the know-how to bring it together, create this environment. But have we got the willingness? That's probably, and can we persuade those with the financial resources to come and join us? I mean, that's what we need to do.
It doesn't, I don't think it requires very much. I give you the example the other day of the biggest vertical farm in Ireland. I mean, Ireland is actually in a way more fertile than England is. It's got no shortage of water. It's got plenty of farmland. The farmland's pretty efficient. But the best vertical farm in Ireland is in Tipperary, and they have they grow herbs, lettuces, leafy greens, all that kind of stuff, mushrooms. But they have their own wind farm, and wind farms in Ireland is I think probably one of the better places in the EU, in Europe, including England, in the use of sustainable energy. And on my electricity bill, they list the amount of the electricity generating in this area, how much you get from renewables, and it's currently 65%. 65% of the energy in Ireland comes from renewable energy, and that's principally, because it's a windy place, it's principally wind farms. So the wind farm technology is actually pretty advanced in Ireland. So it is, and it's possible. It's possible from a regulatory point of view. For if you have a big enough farm, you can put a wind farm on the edge of your farm, and you can probably get away with the planning requirement. So this, and they have a circular. They take stuff from their suppliers and recompost it. So they have a circular economy where they have energy. They have capital cost of providing the energy, but they have virtually zero running cost of the energy. So when you apply that to West Yorkshire and Sheffield, I think there are equivalents there. I think it's also a pretty windy place in Yorkshire, but there is other potentials in that part of the world, as you say, with old coal mines, where you've already got an infrastructure where you're down a kilometre or two into geothermal possibilities, and also in wind. So I think there are an equal opportunity for finding low-cost energy solutions which can be ramped up to produce relatively cheap cheap energy for this kind of operation. The other thing is about space. You know, where can you put this? And we talked about this thing, looking at the Advanced Manufacturing Centre in Sheffield. I think developed largely in the cooperation between the region and the local authority. So there is a capacity that they could make land available either for on a low lease basis or on you know, a joint venture basis, where the capital cost can be minimized, and that's what you need to do to attract companies and to people to come. They need to have some incentive. This is the point that, you know, your friends at Schroders made about doing redevelopment in Sheffield. You know, the councils, the region and local authority need to make it happen. And the way they make this happen is they can be flexible about things like rates and capital cost of land and, you know, regulatory approvals, you know, fast tracking. These are the sorts of things that you can do. But in order to get that done, you need to have a partner who's got some oomph to it. And I think that's the other positive trend that we've found in the last couple of years. We have now an interest from you know, a university, a Hallam University, the Food Research Institute, you know, to come along with this. So I think that's a big help, you know, because then you have a partner who understands the needs, has the skill, but also has the footprint and working relationships with region and local authority, and indeed with governments. So I think that's the key way forward. That's how to make it happen, is that it's that link. One side supplies the energy, and the other side supplies the means and
Technical
you
know-how.
And some of the know-how, yeah, absolutely, to make it happen. So I think this, I think this combination of working with Hallam and other universities is the way forward, because that's often the way. And I think in the modern world, that's how innovations take place. You know, this thing, you know, the iPhone, you know, it's a product of government subsidies in the past. You know, now it's a completely commercial operation, but it only happens because DARPA made, you know, grants available 20 years ago for, you know, satellite communications and other things that are used. And the same thing, I think, applies in this early take up of this technology, is that there needs to be some government, local authority, public sector support for it, which is consistent and significant, and allows commercial companies to say, okay, yeah, well, we'll come and locate in Sheffield on the following conditions. You know, if we get the minimal cost of land, you know, we get some forgiving of rates for a while. That's the kind of thing that the public sector does and allows things to happen. You know, you need to look at things like Canary Wharf. The only reason why Canary Wharf works and is now the basically the development hub of London is because, well, when it was 40, 50 years ago, you know, the Docklands Development Corporation got a lot of money, millions. They got a lot of money, and they got a bypass for a whole load of planning regulations. You know, you can build over 5 stories in central London, or 10 stories, or whatever it was. But this was relaxed in the old Docklands area. Now, that subsidy's long since passed, but they're still building. You know, they're still building now because they've got the thing that started off with this government local authority agencies. And some people objected to that. why should you give money for these kind of things to happen? But the net benefit, I think, has been tremendous. You know, it's made that part of London really work. And the same thing could apply in Sheffield.
So do you think that's enough for our intro?
I think that's enough for now.
I mean, there's plenty to talk about. Maybe we'll have another go.
Yeah, well,
and add to it as we make progress.
Yeah, that's true. So I'll stop recording now.